So first of all, can I just ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Chris Difford. I'm a songwriter.
Okay, yeah, and you're dyslexic, I understand.
Yeah, I guess I've never been diagnosed, but I'm certainly am dyslexic. And when I was at school, I had many, many years ago, I had trouble reading and writing and understanding where words sat on a page. But I managed to become a writer, which is kind of odd.
Can you tell us the story of how you got from finding it difficult to see how words sat on a page to becoming a writer?
Well, I needed to express myself because I lived in a kind of imagination and a silent world most of the time. And the only way to do that for me was to write down how I felt, regardless of whether people could understand what I was writing. And I soon got used to being able to just accept the way that I communicated was through poems or through lyrics, stories, and that became something that kept me calm, and it kept me being who I was, really.
Yeah, yeah. You say it kept you calm. I mean, did you find that there was stress at school, for instance?
Well, yeah, there's always stress at a boys' school, but yeah, I just didn't have the aptitude to be able to communicate in any other way.
Would you say there's a connection between, say, let's call it the dyslexia? Would you say there's a connection between the dyslexia and the creativity that's come from your pen, as it were?
Yeah, very much so. I've interviewed a lot of people on my own podcast and a lot of songwriters from around the place, and I think we all have that in common, that we had an imagination that we couldn't express in any other way than by writing it down, and that became songs.
Yeah,
that's a way of communicating our imagination and just being who we are as writers.
And do you think you've ever sort of communicated? So, I mean, school can be quite difficult, especially if you can't find where the words are on a page. I mean, I experienced this at school myself. And do you find that that's ever crept into your songwriting? Have you ever written, maybe even indirectly, about how your formative experiences affected you in later life?
I haven't written the story of dyslexia, if you're asking me that. I mean, that's a very good challenge, I have to say. But, when I was at school, dyslexia wasn't a word that people used. They just call you backward.
Yeah. Yeah. And did that affect you as a schoolboy?
It must have done. I wasn't an outwardly going lad anyway. So it was kind of, it made me sit in a very different place to so many other kids.
Yeah.
But looking back, I'm kind of grateful for the space that I had, because it created a space where I could write lyrics and become a writer.
And I read somewhere, a couple of places actually, you've mentioned that when you were a schoolboy, you had a particular teacher who encouraged you to write.
Yeah, there was a teacher who stood in for a couple of weeks while the head English teacher was off ill, and he was a young student, and he was very expressive and very, very kind. He would kind of read my poems and thought they were interesting, and it was the first time anybody had connected with me.
And so you kind of then connected with the world through the writing, I suppose.
Indeed, yeah. He kind of made it possible for me to believe that I could actually do something with what I was writing.
Do you remember his name?
No, I'm sadly I don't, but one day I'll find it.
He's probably watching this or listening to your podcasts going, that was me, something
yeah,
like
maybe.
I mean, dyslexia doesn't only affect, or it doesn't have to only affect sort of reading and writing. It can affect things like memory and organization. I mean, have you ever found that there have been memory challenges or organization challenges or left-right challenges, sequencing, this kind of thing? Or even, as it were, physical challenges, like with call them motor skills, sort of when you play the guitar, you get your fingers in the wrong place, that kind of thing. Have you ever found that it's affected you in these ways?
No, if anything, I'm sort of more concentrating on or concentrated on being tidy.
Yeah.
My memory, I test my memory by inventing ideas and then not writing them down. And then coming back to them the following day. And if they're still there, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. And your lyrics, for those of people who haven't heard them, I mean, they're terrific. I mean, you're an Ivor Novello award-winning writer, and they're very visual. I mean, do you kind of see the stories that you write when you write them down?
I think I do, yeah. I think I find a lot of characters become alive on the page, but only for a short time. They kind of disappear after a while, which I suppose they would have to.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. I've also read that you've done some work with prisoners.
Yeah.
And helping them sort of access their own creativity. Now, it turns out that perhaps around about 50% of prisoners in British prisons are dyslexic. Have you ever noticed that there's a need within prisons for the prisoners to if you like, to manifest their creativity, to be creative, because they, maybe they've just not had that opportunity in the past?
It depends on the individual. A lot of people only come to creative writing courses just to do something different while they're there.
Yeah.
But then other people can be quite creative, and I think the important thing is that they get to tell the story of where they've been, and then that can become a song in itself. So they have to, when I'm working with people like that, I get them to write down just a short story of what they would like a song to be about.
Yeah, yeah. And do you find there's any resistance? I mean, I'm guessing in prisons that it's kind of certainly in male prisons, I imagine it's quite a masculine environment, quite a sort of a hard environment. Is there any sort of resilience, not resilience, any resistance to being creative?
Yeah, there's a ton of it, really, because for most of them, particularly lifers, they have a routine that they live in each day. They're not going to get out particularly, and that routine is very. It keeps them on the straight and narrow, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So for them to sort of branch out and try something new, 90% of them don't bother. But, you get the odd one who is interested in reading books. Somebody might discover God, and go into the Bible. A lot of people go into recovery, which is nice. And that brings creativity in itself.
And you talk about recovery. There's a strong link between not only dyslexia in prison, but dyslexia and substance abuse. You've been, if I may ask, you've been quite open about your own struggles with alcoholism in the past, and drugs as well. I mean, did that come from just a difficult sort of life growing up, or was it simply from the pressures of touring and being a sort of an overnight successful band and the ups and the downs that brought along?
I think being in a band and addiction and alcoholism and so on was born out of just a young lad who didn't really know what he wanted, and filling time really is, when you're young and you're on tour, you can fill time by drinking, and it sort of whiles away as the hours, and before you know it, you haven't stopped drinking for like 5 years, but you don't realize that, and then that becomes an addiction, and then that becomes something else that you have to respond to on a daily basis. But like the prisoner who's in jail, there's a security of addiction that keeps you in that place, and it keeps you trapped so you can't get out. So it takes a lot of work and to get you into a much better place.
And I mean, personally, did you find that the creativity and the writing helped you get into that better place, or was it something else in particular?
Yeah, creativity can definitely spin you into a safe place, and that's what I tried to do. It's just when you're younger, it's really easy to, or it seems anyway, easier to access the space of creativity. When you get older, there's less opportunity to do that, I find.
Yeah, and that's simply because of pressures of life, I'm guessing. But I mean, I also assume that there's less opportunity to access that creativity if you're in prison. I mean, is that correct?
Again, it's down to the individual and what they proceed to do. You know, some people, have a routine that they like to keep to, and it doesn't involve creativity. It's just getting from morning to night without being in too much trouble, basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, I suppose if I'm going to try to draw a line from what we've been saying, I kind of hear that there was a young boy who felt sort of almost alienated at school, who found sort of reading difficult at school, and who sort of retreated into himself, to finding an outlet, a creative outlet, because there was a teacher who encouraged you, to ending up sort of still not quite knowing where you were and filling that hole with substances and sort of drink, essentially, and falling into the habits of addiction, and yet being able to use the creativity to get out of that and to help others out of that. Is that a broad sort of outline or do you recognize that essentially?
Yeah, that's definitely been the journey. That's the maypole, if you like. I'm very grateful for all of those twists and turns. I think it's been an incredible space to be in. And I think dyslexia, as much as it can hold people back, it can also help you develop as a person and make you not just individual, but make you something very, very special, I think. Addicts are pretty good at that.